June 15th, 1952. High noon in Harlem, and Inspector Henry Whitmore walked through the door of the Equalizer with 6 police officers behind him like a small army. In his hand, an official paper. In his eyes, the satisfaction of a man who believed the law was on his side. 30 customers sat frozen mid-bite as Whitmore's voice cut through the lunchtime chatter. Close for violation of Code 14B, serving whites and Negroes in the same establishment. The room went silent, not the silence of respect, but the silence that comes before a storm. Behind the counter, Bumpy Johnson stood perfectly still, watching everything, saying nothing. His face revealed nothing, but anyone who truly knew him understood that silence was never empty with Bumpy. It was the quiet before calculation, the pause before precision. Whitmore moved to the entrance and nailed the closure notice to the door, while his officers began forcing everyone out. Black women wept openly, white intellectuals protested loudly, but it made no difference. Jim Crow law didn't care about willingness or friendship or shared humanity. It only cared about separation, about keeping the color line intact no matter who bled in the process. And Bumpy watched it all from his position at the counter, motionless as a statue, while his dream was sealed shut with chains and padlocks. The officers worked efficiently, professionally, as if destroying someone's livelihood was just another Tuesday afternoon task. But something about Bumpy's stillness made even the most seasoned officer uncomfortable. There was weight in that silence, promise in that calm. "Should have read the laws before opening this integration den," Whitmore said, walking toward Bumpy with the swagger of a man protected by badges and paperwork. "In Harlem, nigger eats with nigger, white with white. That's how God intended it. That's what the law demands." He stood close enough that Bumpy could smell the cheap cologne and cheaper righteousness. Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even blink. He simply looked at Whitmore for 5 endless seconds, the kind of look that made men remember it years later in their nightmares. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out through the back door, leaving Whitmore standing alone in the empty restaurant, suddenly feeling less victorious than he'd expected. To understand what happened in the weeks that followed, you need to understand what the Equalizer represented to Harlem. It wasn't just a restaurant where people ate food and paid bills. It was the only place in a segregated city where progressive whites, black intellectuals, jazz musicians, and working families could share a table without fear of violence or arrest or judgment. It was a pocket of what America claimed to be, but rarely was. Bumpy had opened it in 1950, 2 years before this moment of destruction, and he'd chosen the name deliberately, the Equalizer. Inside those walls, everyone was equal. A white university professor could debate theology with a black preacher. A jazz pianist could share dessert with a surgeon. Children of different colors could split a slice of pie and never understand why the world outside said they shouldn't. It was revolution served on plates, rebellion disguised as hospitality. The Jim Crow laws were in full force in 1952, that peculiar American system that claimed separate but equal, while delivering neither separation that was truly separate, nor equality that was remotely equal. Bathrooms segregated, water fountains segregated, schools segregated, buses segregated, lives segregated. The South had its explicit laws printed in black and white, but the North had its practices, its unspoken rules, its ways of enforcing racial hierarchy without admitting that's what it was doing. In Harlem, segregation wore the mask of public order and health codes and zoning regulations. But everyone knew the truth beneath the bureaucratic language. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a businessman trying to make profit from serving food. He was a strategist who understood that real revolution happened at dinner tables, not on battlefields. Shared meals broke down walls that protests sometimes couldn't touch. But there were people who feared that quiet revolution more than they feared riots in the streets, and Henry Whitmore was one of them. He'd been an inspector with the Department of Health for 12 years, and in that time, he'd become the frontline soldier of segregation, using health codes the way other men used clubs and dogs. He'd shut down 17 black-owned establishments in 3 years, always finding violations. Unsanitary kitchen, he'd write. Inadequate ventilation. evidence of pest infestation. But everyone in Harlem knew the real violation was success, was dignity. Was any black person rising above the position white supremacy had assigned them? Whitmore had protection. The kind that mattered. The police backed him, the department backed him, city officials backed him. He was untouchable, or so he believed. And maybe he would have stayed untouchable if he'd chosen different targets, smaller targets. People without Bumpy Johnson's particular genius for seeing the invisible pressure points that held corrupt systems together. The day after the closure, Bumpy didn't march down to City Hall. Didn't hire lawyers or organize protests or make speeches about justice. He did something far more dangerous to men like Whitmore. He started gathering information. He called Jerome, the parking attendant who knew every car that moved through Manhattan, who saw everything and was seen by no one. Whitmore, I need to know everything about him. Where he lives, where he goes, who he talks to, what he does when he thinks nobody's watching. Jerome understood immediately. When Bumpy asked for information in that particular tone, it meant someone had crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. Then Bumpy called Sadie, who cleaned offices at the Department of Health after everyone went home, who had keys to filing cabinets and access to documents that were supposed to be confidential. I need copies. Every inspection Whitmore signed off on for the past 5 years. Dates, locations, reports, violations, everything. Sadie hesitated only a moment. Bumpy had always paid her fairly, had always made sure her son had Christmas presents when money was tight, had always treated cleaning work like it mattered because it did. You'll have it by Friday, she whispered. A quick pause. In this incredible story of Bumpy Johnson, just to invite you, if you enjoy learning more about the American Mafia underworld, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any curiosities. He called Marcus, the bartender at the club where city employees drank after work, where tongues got loose and secrets spilled across mahogany counters. Whitmore, I want to know what he drinks, who he drinks with, what he says when alcohol makes him honest. Marcus laughed quietly. That one talks too much after 3 bourbons. I'll write down every word. For 2 weeks, Bumpy built a file, not just about Whitmore, but about the entire system protecting him, every connection and corruption and hidden compromise. Each piece of information was like a card in a house of cards. Remove the right one, and the whole structure collapses. Bumpy had spent his entire life learning which cards to pull. Jerome returned first with information that made Bumpy's eyes narrow with interest. Whitmore lives in Queens, 2-story house, quiet street, married with 2 kids. But 3 times a week he parks at an apartment building in Greenwich Village. Always Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, always at 9 p.m. Stays until midnight, leaves through the back entrance. A married man with a secret nighttime routine. Interesting, but not enough yet. Sadie delivered a box of papers that Bumpy spent 3 nights reading by lamplight, making notes, seeing patterns that would be invisible to someone less patient. Whitmore had closed 17 black-owned establishments, but never a single white-owned business, even when other inspectors had documented serious violations. The pattern was obvious, discriminatory, and completely documented. But there was something even more interesting buried in those reports. In 12 of the 17 closures, Whitmore had cited severe rat infestation, and in every single case, he'd recommended the same pest control company, Higgins & Sons. Bumpy had Jerome investigate. Turned out Higgins was Whitmore's brother-in-law. Each closure generated $500 in contracts. Racism wasn't just hatred for Whitmore. It was a profitable business model. Marcus brought the kind of information that was worth more than gold. Whitmore drank bourbon, always 3 doubles, and he complained about his wife constantly. That woman won't leave me alone, he'd tell other inspectors. But the most valuable information was what he said when he was drunk enough to forget discretion. He bragged about cleaning Harlem of nigger lovers, used exactly those words, repeated them like a slogan. Marcus had a memory like a recording device, and he gave Bumpy every disgusting phrase. Then came the information that changed everything. That apartment in Greenwich Village wasn't hiding a mistress. It was hiding something far more dangerous for a man like Whitmore. The apartment belonged to Thomas Brennan, a literature professor, 34 years old, unmarried. Jerome had watched carefully, had taken risks to get photographs. Whitmore always entered through the back door, always left after midnight, always looked around nervously to make sure no one saw him. The truth was obvious to anyone willing to see it. Bumpy didn't judge who Whitmore loved. Love was love, and a man's private life was his own business. But in 1952 New York, homosexuality wasn't just socially unacceptable. It was criminal. A married public official, a self-proclaimed defender of God's law and traditional morality, maintaining a secret relationship with another man. If that information became public, Whitmore's career would be destroyed, his marriage would end, and he might face criminal charges. It was the kind of secret that gave someone leverage, real leverage, the kind that moved mountains. Bumpy spent 3 more days organizing everything into a document that read like a prosecutor's closing argument. Section 1. Racial discrimination, proven through statistical analysis of closure patterns. Section 2. Financial corruption, documented through contracts and family connections. Section 3. Racist statements, testified by multiple witnesses. Section 4. Private life, photographed and verified. Each section alone was damaging. Together they were nuclear. On July 5th, 3 weeks after the closure, Bumpy prepared the package. Thick manila envelope, no return address. 47 pages organized with tabs and labels. He attached a single-sentence cover letter that said everything without threatening anything. The law protects those who protect the law. Simple, clear, devastating. But Bumpy didn't send the file to Whitmore. That would be blackmail, a federal crime. The kind of mistake that would put him in prison. Instead, he sent copies to 6 people. The police captain who'd provided officers for the closure, the head of the Department of Health, 3 city councilmen, and the editor of the Amsterdam News, Haarlem's black newspaper. Each received the complete package. Each now possessed information that created obligations, that demanded responses, that couldn't be ignored. He didn't send it to Whitmore, but he made sure Whitmore knew. Jerome parked outside Whitmore's house at 6 a.m. the next morning, sitting in his car holding an identical envelope, just watching. When Whitmore came out to go to work, Jerome waved slowly and drove away. The message was clear without a single word spoken. We know, and others know. Your secret isn't secret anymore. At 9 a.m., the police captain called Whitmore. The conversation lasted 17 minutes. Witnesses said Whitmore came out of that office pale, sweating, shaking like a man who'd just seen his future collapse. At 10 a.m., the Department of Health chief called an emergency meeting. By 11 a.m., 3 city lawyers were analyzing every page of Bumpy's file, looking for something false, something they could dismiss, and finding nothing but verified truth. The editor of the Amsterdam News called Bumpy directly. This material is dynamite. Can I publish it? Bumpy took a long breath before answering. Not yet. Give them 48 hours to do the right thing. If they don't, it's yours. The editor understood. This wasn't just revenge. This was strategic justice. This was giving the system a chance to correct itself before public destruction. For 2 days, tense silence hung over Haarlem. The restaurant stayed closed. Whitmore didn't show up to work. The 6 people who'd received the file held closed-door meetings. Internal investigators confirmed every fact. It was all true, all explosive, all perfectly legal to possess and share. On the morning of the 3rd day, July 8th, something extraordinary happened. 2 police officers appeared at the equalizer, not to arrest anyone but to remove the chains. No explanations, no paperwork, just orders from above. By 10 a.m., the official seal was torn off. By 11 a.m., the door was open again, and the first customers were walking in like nothing had ever happened. No newspaper published the file. No public investigation was opened. But Henry Whitmore was transferred to an administrative office in Albany, 240 kilometers away. Promotion, the official statement said. Everyone knew the truth. It was exile. It was silencing. It was the price of attacking someone with Bumpy Johnson's particular combination of patience, intelligence, and network. The pest control company owned by Whitmore's brother-in-law lost all its city contracts within a week. A routine audit found irregularities. Fines were issued. The business closed within 3 months. No official connection to Whitmore was mentioned, but the message echoed through every corrupt corner of city government. There were consequences now, real consequences, for people who thought themselves untouchable. Bumpy reopened the equalizer without ceremony or celebration. First day, 30 customers. Second day, 50. Within a week, it was packed again. Whites and blacks sitting together, eating together, talking together, laughing together, as if Jim Crow laws didn't exist. Because inside those walls, by Bumpy Johnson's will and protection, they didn't exist. Other inspectors walked past the integrated restaurant now and kept walking. Nobody dared enter with closure papers. The word had spread through the bureaucratic network faster than official memos ever could. Leave Bumpy's place alone. He's got protection we can't see. It wasn't supernatural protection. It was information, carefully gathered, strategically deployed, and absolutely devastating when used correctly. In the right hands, information was more powerful than any weapon the police carried. Bumpy never spoke publicly about what happened, never bragged about the victory, never explained his methods. But everyone in Harlem knew. The man who'd closed the restaurant for serving whites and blacks had been neutralized not with violence, but with truth. And truth in the right hands, applied at the right pressure points, was sharper than any blade ever forged. Years later, when people asked how he'd managed to reopen the equalizer, Bumpy would smile slightly and say, "I gave them information they needed to have." He never elaborated. Didn't need to. In Harlem, everyone understood. Bumpy Johnson hadn't fought Jim Crow law with his fists or with protests in the street. He'd fought it with intelligence, with patience, with a deep understanding that every oppressor has secrets they cannot afford to expose. And when you find those secrets, when you hold them carefully and deploy them precisely, you don't need violence. You just need to show them what you know, and let them imagine what might happen if everyone else knew it too. That fear, that imagination, that was the real weapon. And Bumpy wielded it like a master.